You're watching Cable 2.
30 seconds. 15. Welcome to the Winston-Salem Forsyth High School's Board of Education COVID-19 Committee Update. Today is Tuesday, June 18th. I'm Superintendent Angela Harrison. I'll turn the meeting over at this time to Committee Chair Marilyn Parker.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hairston. I do believe I'll call this meeting to order. It's our third meeting of the COVID-19 committee. Dr. Hairston, would you like to do a roll call to establish our board orders?
Yes, ma'am. We have Marilyn Parker.
Here.
Dana Jones.
Here.
Andrea Bramer.
Here.
Deanna Kaplan.
Here.
And Elizabeth Motzinger.
Here.
We have everyone present. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you. We'll move into discussion items. The first item is a communication update. This will be from Brent Campbell, who is our Chief Communications Officer. So, Mr. Campbell, thank you.
Good afternoon. How is everyone this afternoon? Got me all right? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. And I've shared my screen with you, so I think you'll be able to see our safe return, which is our back to school plan for 2020-2021. Myself and my team, and then Mary Jamis with M Creative, which is the marketing and design firm that, as you know, we've retained to help us with this critical communication plan. I've been working on this. So we thought we would start by sharing what is our entire theme, and again, that is our safe return. This is kind of the look and the branding that we've landed on, the very basic message or the principle behind all the work that the district is doing, and that is trying to create a safe return to learning. That's the bottom line here, right? So this is how and where, and so it's how and where of the learning and how that may look different. That kind of goes into the plan here, but the idea being that all of our work is centered around students, staff, and community safety. And so as we put this plan together, we'll roll through for you what are our communication goals. Obviously, first off, reassure parents and families that we as a district are well prepared for a safe return to learning in the fall, and try to establish the expectations of flexibility, as we all know that's required this day and age, in order to ensure that safety. We hope to provide timely and accurate dissemination of information to parents, students, families, and employees on key information that's related to how we will return to learning in the fall. Moving on, stay ahead of the curve. We want to limit the spread of misinformation by being proactive in our information sharing, trying to anticipate questions that we may have from parents and families and try to address them candidly, but also confidently. We also want to direct parents, students, employees, and the community at large to a single source for reliable information on our safe return to learning, and that would, of course, be our website. We want to avoid over-communication. As we know, there's lots of information out there, lots of things changing day to day, so we don't want people to get tired of the message, but we also want to avoid under-communication. So we've got to be conscious of our frequency, our consistency, and the usage that we use for different sources of information. Another one of our goals is to be able to adapt and adjust quickly to all the new information that can impact the safe return to learning. We will monitor questions, comments, and misinformation on the web and social media, also within some influencer groups that are related to back to school, and we will try to address those as necessary on those platforms. And of course, we will try to address all communication efforts through an equity lens. So where are we? Where have we started? Well, obviously June 2020, we're halfway through the month, believe it or not. We are preparing and releasing the back to school survey, which we have already done to parents, students, community members in English and Spanish. That survey was released on the 10th of this month. And then we released the employee survey, and that was released on the 12th. We have prepared and executed a shorter survey that was distributed to parents and students, and we asked schools to really target some of the harder to reach families or families that they may not see as often or may not have as often communication with, as they were dropping off laptops, books, those types of things to school through most of last week. So that survey was distributed again last week, the week of June 7th. We are starting slowly to process and evaluate that survey data. And then we are designing and developing our Safe Return landing page. That page is up, it went live last week, and it will be a page that morphs and changes over time as we add information, change information, move information around, and then complement our Safe Return to Learning page, our landing page with social media, in addition to our regular outreach, which we do via text, email, voicemail, and our mobile app to our parents and our families and our staff. As we move into July, we're going to be able to design or start designing and conducting focus groups, hopefully in early July among defined audiences to give some greater depth and provide that qualitative support for survey results. We're going to share the survey highlights, obviously, with our parents, families, and the community. And we're going to enhance the Our Safe Return landing page with some videos, some updated FAQs, guidelines as we receive them and they are put into place, committee updates, again, based on survey and focus group feedback, as well as the anticipated back to school plan. We anticipate this communication really needs to go into August, into the beginning of school and through the beginning of school, and possibly even further into the first part of the year. So we'll closely monitor and report on updates on back to school mandatories as we start to get closer to school, and those things that will be mandatory for parents to know, the need to know information. We'll consider some production of some online parent-family guidebooks of those mandatories, possibly some mailers as well, some safety precautions and useful learning tools and resources that they may need to know, again, for that safe return to learning. And of course, we'll continually provide updates on the safe return to learning, including if there are any cases and how COVID may impact our schools once students are in the building, if those cases are reported, and the swift actions that we take in the district to address and identify those. So with that, I would like to introduce to you our partner that's working with us, and that's Mary Jamis. She's going to talk you through the campaign a little more in depth and the centerpiece of our campaign, which is the landing page and the website and the hub of all of our information. So Mary?
Thank you, Brent. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like for you to just click on that slide, Our Safe Return, which will take you to the website just briefly so that we can scroll just to see if you haven't had the opportunity, if we can scroll down the page just really quickly. This is what the site looks like, and then I'll come back. You'll see the survey in English and Spanish, and just an introduction to what this page is all about. Scroll down a little bit farther and you'll see resources that we have that families can click on, whether it be the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools calendar, meal site opportunities that are available even through the summer, health and wellness resources, which I'll touch on just a little bit later, and the importance of those, and of course COVID-19 information. We've got news dates, news updates. We'll include those as we go through the summer and do weekly updates there. We have an important frequently asked questions section that you'll see expand and grow over the next several months as families have questions. We want to be able to address those, so we've given them the opportunity to submit a question. If they have a question about the safe return to school, then we also have an opportunity for them, if they need some assistance, to fill out the form to the right that you see there. And if you scroll down just a little bit more, we've got the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools equity statement. It's important that we keep that in mind and really contextualize everything that we're talking about and messaging about over the next several months with that equity lens in place. And then finally, what we see coming from the state are the 3 W's, and we wanted to, again, reinforce those and create some visual interest to the site with the wear, wait, and wash information. So let's go to the next slide. please. Scroll down to.
Sorry, it jumped to the beginning of the presentation again. I'm getting there.
Okay, this slide. So you'll see again what we know, and this information comes from yesterday, that we've already had over 2,000 unique page views to the website already, to the landing page. I don't want to call it a website because it really is a landing page on the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools website. And to date, as of yesterday, we had over 2,200 views to that landing page. So again, a reminder for folks when they come to the page right now, they can take the survey, go through all of the resources that are available, and you see those other things. Let's go to the next slide, Brent. One of the really important things that has been a part of our process, working with Brent and his teams thus far, is the design and release of a survey that went out to parents and families. There's also an employee survey. We won't be talking about that today, but the good news, and again, these numbers have increased. So we got updated information yesterday from Andy Kraft that as of yesterday at 1:30, we've had over 13,500 responses to the survey. And that breakdown, as far as English, Spanish, as of yesterday was over 13,000 coming English surveys and about 371 Spanish surveys. Also, we reached out to the Hispanic League today and have asked for their support in pushing messaging out to the Hispanic community and directing them to the website so that we can increase that number. We're continuing to keep an eye on that number and also working in conjunction with some other organizations who have had success reaching out to the Hispanic community for additional survey responses. But overall, a very good response to the survey. We're getting really great survey data, very robust data, and I wanted to share some of that preliminary information with you. Hold on, don't scroll yet. So what we're seeing is that when we ask parents and families about how successful they were in the spring with distance learning, remote learning, what we found is that there was overall very positive feedback on the spring remote learning efforts. And so that's good news for the district, certainly. We also asked a question around how concerned are you about each of the factors as your child returns to school in the fall. And what we found out was that parents are quite concerned about their students' academic growth. And what we see is that concern was actually heightened among respondents completing the survey in English, somewhat less so for those completing the survey in Spanish, but still of concern. So my students' academic growth, again, parents are concerned about that. We're seeing concerns about their students' health and risk of exposure to COVID-19. And again, what we're seeing there is that we saw heightened concern in the Spanish survey from those respondents who filled out the survey in Spanish. Let's go to the next page. We're also seeing some other, so this slide will just cover some information on respondents completing the survey in English. What we saw for them is that they see the mental health and childcare issues as significant challenges if distance learning continues in the fall. So we want to be mindful of that, and we purposefully actually put some health and wellness resources initially on the landing page, anticipating that parents and families would have concerns around mental health issues. But we're also seeing that child care in the fall will become a concern. At least the data is suggesting directionally that information. I also want to caution you all that we have, again, we're looking at this data in a very preliminary fashion. Once we get the opportunity to look at it more closely, these results may change, but directionally what we're seeing now is that these are some of the issues that we're going to be paying attention to as we look more closely at the data. Also, what we're seeing is that families are open to, we offered them combinations of in-school and remote learning, and most of the families we're seeing are open to any combination that we provided of in-school and remote learning. Also, one thing to keep in mind and surprisingly so, I think, is that almost 1/3 of students reported using a mobile phone as their primary device for remote learning in the spring. So again, an important piece of information to keep in mind. As we look at some of the things that we're seeing for respondents who completed the survey in Spanish, what we're seeing is that they identified access to a computer or laptop as one of the most significant challenges that they anticipate should distance learning continue in the fall. So again, very different than those who completed the survey in English. So we know that those resources are important to those who completed the survey in Spanish. Also, what we're seeing from those who completed the survey in Spanish is that many families are, again, as earlier mentioned, open to a number of different possible combinations of in-school and remote learning. And again, similarly, lots of use of a mobile device for remote learning. Yes, so, and much more so, and the use of Chromebook or laptop, access to those devices was mentioned more often by those who filled out the survey in Spanish. If we go on to the next slide, there are two important slides that I want to share with you. One is around, I know there's a lot of question that we're seeing a lot of questions around transportation needs and issues. What I want to point you to is just the number of folks who are responding to the survey. If you look at the top two pieces of information, my student currently uses the bus to get to school, and in the fall would require, again, transportation using the bus. And then also, my student currently uses the bus to get to school in the fall, but I'm hesitant. And what you'll see among those who completed the survey in English is that we're looking at about 33% of respondents saying that there is some requirement for transportation. Whether hesitant or not, there still is that need for transportation. If we go to the next slide and we look at that same number for those who completed the survey in Spanish, what we're seeing is that number jumps from 33% to about 54% among those, again, who completed the survey in Spanish. So a greater need for transportation from those who completed the survey in Spanish, something to, again, to keep in mind. One last slide that we'll share with you today as part of the preliminary findings is that the very last question we asked, how likely are you to send your child back to school with in the fall in the Winston-Salem Forsyth County school system? It's important to note what we were looking at was the not likely at all number. And what you see is that of those who completed the survey in English, 12% roughly said that. If you go to the next slide, those who completed the survey were comparing 12% to 20% saying that they have concerns or are unlikely to send their child to school in the fall. So again, some really important things to keep in mind. When we're really closely monitoring the survey, it will inform us greatly as we think about information content that we'll see on the Safe Return landing page moving forward, and our ability to address some of these concerns. And I know the other committees will be looking at this information as well carefully. So our ability to answer some of these questions and concerns effectively through frequently asked questions or other forms through that landing page will be key. And I think that's the last slide for the communications presentation. Brent, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Oh, excuse me. This is Elizabeth, and I had a question about the 12 and 20%. Was the option to send their child to the virtual academy included in that answer?
It was not.
Okay.
Let's go back to 2 slides, Brent, if you would like, and you'll see sort of the options that they had. This was how the question was worded, just for ease of interpretation for the folks who filled out the survey in English. So that is the actual question, and that you'll see that they were given the choice of, extremely likely, quite likely, somewhat likely, not at all likely. So virtual academy was not a part of that question.
Okay. Do you think that it's possible that's an estimate of how many students will choose to use a virtual academy? Or is that not connected?
I'm not sure I would draw that conclusion, and but it's a good question. And what we can do is perhaps look at some of the other information in relation to this as we're going, again, more carefully through the data to understand whether some of these folks who have the concern might be open to distance learning exclusively. We have the opportunity to look at this question in relation to another question that does focus more specifically on distance remote learning exclusively. And so we'll take that. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I think right now, I guess there's no way to really track. We have just over 1,300 students registered for the virtual academy. So I guess they're probably, how would that tie into the percentage, Mary? It's hard to draw that correlation, I guess.
Again, we have a question in the survey that talks specifically about their interest in virtual learning exclusively. So we might be able to look at that data in relation to this particular question and see what kind of folks who responded to the distance learning exclusively, how many of them also responded that they were not likely to send their child to school in the fall, and see what relationship those two questions have to one another. And I've made a note of that, and I think it's a really important question, and I think we can perhaps get a little bit more clarity if we look a little bit more closely at the data.
And well, I'll let you, I did have a comment about Virtual Academy, but Ms. Parker, I wanted you to, just if I could ask for a minute when you're done with this section, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, that'll be fine. Any other questions or comments regarding the survey or any of this presentation?
Let me just, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Brent. I have a question, but you go right ahead.
I was just going to go ahead and wrap up just by saying, in closing, we are going to try to close these surveys out by noon on Monday. We are messaging to families again today to remind them of the survey and to let them know that. And then we will begin really finalizing that data and analyzing and including the paper surveys. One thing to note is this information does not have the paper surveys in them just of yet. Schools are still turning those in. We've given them till the end of the day today to turn those in, and obviously that's going to take a little more time to put those in, but we do have the paper surveys as well. And we'll of course take the complete data from the survey to share it with our community or our committees, because there's pieces of that information that'll touch the work of literally every single one of these committees. And the intent is for this information to really help them focus, help them temper their community concerns, the perception around their areas, and the desire that the community may have when it comes to piecing together their plans. And then obviously the committees will hopefully form some focus and hone in on the information and then form some focus committees so they can really hone in on anything else that they would like to explore more. So our first steps, as you notice, have been really to focus our committees and seek information. And obviously as time progresses, what we'll be doing is transitioning from that information seeking role and helping to shape internal decisions to that information sharing role, and really helping our families and communities understand what this is going to mean for them and how that safe return plan impacts them, but also the community. Again, driving everyone in every way to that website. And last thing I have to say is, as we zero in on some solid decisions for next year, we expect to use multiple ways, and I say untraditional ways even, that are untraditional for us as a district, to really target this information. We've already talked about some digital advertising, some other forms that we don't traditionally use to push out information, but ways to make sure that the entire community kind of knows where we're headed.
I can't listen to it all right now. Hang on.
So again, we want everybody to know about our safe return. So that kind of wraps it up for us. Dana?
Thanks, Brent. I had one question. I believe on the survey, there was a question about what school do you currently attend? Mm-hmm. And so is there a way that we can look at this data? So I'm glad that we're seeing, the 13,000 plus responses.
Yes.
But are they all, what's the percentage per school? And to make sure that we're really hearing the voices. I know this is early on, but I think for me as a board member, I would appreciate seeing kind of what that looks like for every school, to make sure that we're really hearing all the voices and trying to be, then if we realize we have some gaps, that we can try to be intentional reaching out to leadership in the school to hear from their parents.
Let me ask you about how important it is for school-specific information versus what we had planned to do was look at high school versus middle school versus elementary school and sort of group the data that way. My concern is that looking school-specifically, we might get really low numbers, but the original intent was actually to look at the differences that we're seeing. And again, that's going to require us to do a little bit more deeper dive in the data analysis, but getting that information, again, by those three, would that be helpful?
I do think that would be helpful. My concern, especially when we were talking around transportation, is that we're not really listening to, we have a large, overwhelming group of, say, suburban parents who are saying transportation is not a problem. One of the things we are talking about is will we eliminate in-zone transportation for our families that have choice to a different school. And I really have concern that maybe we're not capturing that's going to be a big problem for certain families in certain areas. And I think we're talking about looking at this through an equity lens. And I think if we don't really try to be intentional to hear from specific groups of parents, that we're really going to miss the equity lens. That's my concern.
I think
This is Board Member Bramer, and as a parent, I want to let you know that I filled out the survey,
Thank
but
you.
I did not sign up for Virtual Academy, and I'm holding on Virtual Academy to determine, as a parent, so I know there's going to be people just like me, to determine whether or not you're going to allow my child to go to the school they're currently at. And if we switch them and say no, then they go Virtual Academy, and if they don't go Virtual Academy, they go homeschool. I will not have them switch schools. This is where they've been, and this is where I want them.
Yeah. Yep.
As a parent, and I know there's a lot of parents like me out there.
I think once we close this survey down on Monday, we can see just how many children per school we're getting and where we can pull numbers that are reliable. And maybe we just think about grouping certain schools together that may have similar profiles that allow us to make those numbers a little bit more robust as we look at the data. So.
That's a great idea. I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that.
I think that's very important because I also think that it will make a difference about the parents who really cannot, who have to be at work and who really cannot possibly be helpful or be a part of online learning. So I think it's really important that we kind of get that data. My other kind of question would be, I'm wondering too, and I know there's probably no way that we can figure this one out, but I'm wondering how many people who have already signed up for Virtual Academy just didn't bother to do the survey because they'd already made a decision. So, I know we can't capture that, but if in any of your creative thinking, if you can think of a way that that might be a possibility, I think.
Well, again,
that would be helpful.
We do have the opportunity to look at the data from folks who identified and answered one of the questions as, I'm considering only remote learning for my child, and we can actually pull the data that way and see if we see anything there that's worth mentioning. So
Super. Ms. Bramer, I think, do you have a hand up again, or is that from the last time?
That was from before.
Okay, good. Thanks. Sorry.
Thank you very much, everyone.
thank you.
Anybody, any other questions or anything? All right. Well, thank y'all very much.
Thank
for
you.
your informative presentation.
Thank you.
And Ms. Parker, before we move to the next one, I did want to mention that Tuesday, Dr. Scales and Dr. Pratt both will bring a more detailed report relative to the virtual academy. That particular opportunity, we may have to go back and do some additional surveys as parents register for that. And we're in the midst of registration for for that program. So they'll have a pretty detailed set of list of information. looked at that concept when we realized some parents were looking for alternatives, and we wanted our parents to have some alternatives. So in doing so, it came down to whether that would be an independent school or a school program that served all schools. And after surveying the principals, we reached a consensus that we really needed to have that serve all schools. And so children are continuing to register, and we're in the process of staffing and providing schedules for those parents. And so Tuesday, they will bring more information about the details of schedules involved, the new enrollment numbers, and seek your direction on some things regarding the school itself. So I just wanted to make everybody aware of that and see if you had any questions.
So, Dr. Harrison, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ms. Jones.
Okay, so Dr. Harrison, are we saying that the parameter for the virtual school has changed? Because I know that I've heard some feedback, I think, and I'm glad to hear this, that we'll hear a detailed report on Tuesday, because I think that when we took initial action on this, we were thinking that that teachers as well as students would stay part of, let's say, ABC elementary school. And then when 20 second graders came out of to say that they were going to be virtual, that somehow that teacher would still be connected to that school and those students would still be there. Is that still the case? And we're just, so the overall premise is that way, but we're just having to change some of the other details?
No, so think of it like the Career Center. When we started the conversation, it was a separate school. We actually, hired a principal, Dr. Scales, to lead the virtual academy. And so in your decision points, we have to make a decision whether the students belong to a separate school code or they belong to the school code. And in surveying the principals, what we came to realize is that, of course, along the way, if those students are taken out of their home school and assigned to the virtual school as an independent school, not only would that reduce the ADM at that school, it reduces the resources such as counselor assignment. The principals would actually take a dip in their pay because those students are no longer assigned to their school. So considering the fact that principals would take a dip in pay, they would start to lose resources like counselors. The parameters were that the students would remain assigned to the school. However, you do have to assign teachers to the academy to work at the academy for evaluation purposes and to manage it. And so what happens as the schools have lost the students to virtual, they stay connected to the school ADM-wise, but the teachers go with the students. And so we have a process in place. Whenever a school loses enrollment, the process is, of course, we take volunteers. And then once you take volunteers, you take your last hired. And so that has been the process for reassigning teachers. There was a request made that the teachers remain in the schools. But what would happen if a school only sent 10 children? There would be no way that the teacher, like a fourth grade teacher, could teach part day virtually and teach only 10 children. So for economy of scale, the teacher is reassigned, or part of the position is reassigned to the academy where they have a whole class. And the goal, and during the parent meeting, the parents requested that the children stay as clustered as possible so they could work together in the community to support children. Mm-hmm. So that adjustment was made so that children could hopefully stay associated with their cluster. But the teachers reassign primarily because you can't have one principal supervising teachers in 80 some different sites. And so the principal has to have the ability to supervise the teachers and keep the continuous learning going and to manage the quality. So the principals, so it was a choice. We talked to the principals. We said, all right, we can stand this up as a separate school because we do have the school code. And then those students would actually be reassigned and become virtual academy students. We also realized in the conversation that parents wanted their children to remain connected to their magnet or their choice school, although they were choosing virtual. And so that adjustment will be recommended on Tuesday. But basically, the teachers go with the students. Otherwise, you can't afford to have the school, and the principals are asked to follow the reduction of student process. And that is but we did ask them, and if we didn't follow that process, we would then have to adjust the counseling staff, we would adjust principal pay, we would adjust all the support systems that go in place with a school. Let's say a school has 800 students and they drop to 5, then right now those 300 students are still connected to their school as they would with Career Academy would be the best example.
Okay, and
Career Center, I'm sorry, Career Center.
I would assume that the if there's testing and scores, then that's not going to be with the virtual academy. Though I guess the virtual administrator will oversee the instruction from the teacher, but then the results, since the student stays with the school, then the scores stay with the school.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
And Dr. Harrison, to piggyback on that a little bit, so let's say, things really improve, and in November, December, we have a fair number of children who choose to go back into classroom learning out of the virtual academy. Will those teachers, will they be assigned back to, will they have a guarantee to be assigned back to the school that they came out of? Or how will that work? Will we have some parameters in place for that?
I'm hesitant always to say guarantee, because we know the teachers work for the district. So what I can say is that if the virtual academy starts to transition down or reduce numbers, teachers will be reassigned to a position within the district. We never really guarantee, because the kids may not go back to that particular school. They may go to private school, they may go to homeschool, they may decide on other schools for choice. So it's no guarantee they'll go back to that school unless the numbers at that school increases, and then we can have some discussion and dialogue.
Yeah, I think that would help with having staff be willing to do the virtual academy. I think that if you're really happy in the school that you're in, and you might be giving up that opportunity to go back and be with that staff, because I think all of our hope is that we'll have a whole lot of children being in a normal setting in the not too near future. So I would like to see if whenever you're doing that, if we could craft some language which we would have first choice if there's a need in the homeschool that they came from, or whatever, just some verbiage there that we would have a little bit more of I know you can't guarantee, nothing's a guarantee, but that we have more of a possibility that they'd be able to return to a setting that they were in if they wanted to previously.
And we'll have, what I'll do is ask Attorney Jenkins to go over our policy for transfers so that we work within that. And if you want to add an administrative regulation to that, some possibilities for that. But I want to paint a picture that if a teacher comes from and some of it's not even teachers, some of it's positions. We've had schools actually lose positions because of virtual, and we just basically took the vacant positions and we'll hire the teacher for virtual academy. But most of it's been voluntary. And I don't want to paint a picture that if 30 students come from a school, that you'll walk down the hall and see a teacher at that school teaching virtual. They will be at a central location or either in their work from home, because some teachers, because of their own health risk, have volunteered. And so those teachers will be working under the supervision of Dr. Scales and that team over there. They won't be working, because it's hard to, if I'm a principal and I've got to go through over 80 principals to get to the teacher who might be having some challenges, that might present an impossible supervision and line of sight for the principal to ensure quality. Because one thing we want to make sure that we do with this virtual schools, we want to make sure that parents feel very good about the quality of that they're receiving. So I don't want to paint that picture, and I don't want to paint a picture that, you know, I want to overdo it, but I don't want to paint that picture.
Right, I agree.
Yeah.
And I know
This
that
is-
you
oh.
can't, but you know, I just think there's some verbiage that, you know, that we, so that we're not, that we are trying to stay true to our staff that want to, you know, if and when a return is, that they would have some first dibs on where they were coming.
Ms. Monsignor?
This is Elizabeth for a second. I just want to say that the likelihood that in November or December, we're going to have kids leaving virtual back into in-person school seems very unlikely given the projections and the way universities are scheduling. They're literally scheduling to not be on campus at all in December or January because of projections of a significant second wave. So I think that people who sign up for the virtual academy should be thinking, this is how my child's going to school next year. And that there has to be an ability for people to make choices, but I think there should be some cutoff points. If you want to register your child for virtual, you need to do it by such and such a date because of the number of teachers you have to hire, and you have to put together classrooms. So I think we're trying to create something that's flexible, but we still also have to have assigned teachers. And if you're in a classroom, the middle of November is not a great time to say, I'm going to move my student. And I do think people should be thinking much more, this is what I'm signing up as my child's school next year. This is how I'm signing up to teach next year. And that things may come and go, and there will be, of course, always exceptions, but that's what you're committing to. And I think that would be clearer than, well, if it looks good in November, I can always switch back in January. I think that would create a lot of chaos myself.
And I just want to remind everyone, if you have 50 children sign up from a school, that's about 2 teachers. And it wouldn't be economically prudent to leave the 2 teachers. I'm not sure what the teachers we could find something for them to do in the school, but they have to follow the kids. And so it just wouldn't, that would be just financially impossible to leave the teachers in the schools. Ms. Bramer, I think you have your hand up, and then Brent, did you want to chime in?
I do, I have my hand up.
Yeah.
It's a quicker one. Looking at, the way that the school system runs with like semesters for high school, it so happens. I agree with Elizabeth. I do not think that the projection is really high for a large second wave and not opening. But if it does go down, say, towards December, would it be logical to finish the semester, finish the quarter before rolling back in?
So one of the things we cannot control is movement among schools. You might be able to limit access to a magnet opportunity, but one of the things that's hard to control is students who elect to leave, let's say, a choice option and go back to the residential school. That's a little difficult. If I have a student who lives in the, let's say, West Forsyth community, and they decide to re-enroll in West Forsyth, it is very difficult to say no if they live in that area. So I think what we'll do is work out some recommended processes. Coaching students is important, when to transition, and then this is an opportunity for us to really support children. So we don't anticipate a lot of movement, but especially away from the virtual. We do anticipate people wanting to jump on virtual or enroll in virtual after the school year starts. So we will have to really think about that, like timelines, deadlines. But the reality is there's so many unknown situations. I think we want to be patient, and what I've tried to advise the principals to do is be patient, be very flexible, and let's think out of the box. So we certainly will consider those comments and those recommendations, absolutely. Brent, did you want to chime in, or you just...
Yeah, I had one interesting piece of data that we didn't share that I thought was related to this that folks may be interested in. 18% of those completing the English survey said that they would consider only distance learning options in the fall, and that's the English survey. 49% in the Spanish survey said that they would consider only distance learning options in the fall. So just some interesting preliminary numbers there that
yeah. And I just think our folks are doing a great job. I want to say to them, but we certainly will have a full presentation on Tuesday and send that to you in advance so you can prepare your questions. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. And that information is important that Brent had. Now we'll go on to transportation policy with Dion Jenkins. Ms. Jenkins?
Good afternoon, board members. I'm going to share my screen so that I can pull up a presentation, a brief presentation. Are you able to see this?
We can, thank you. Is everyone else able to see it?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
So I wanted to provide just some background information about the transportation policies that we have in the district, as well as the statutory references that they are rooted in. At our last COVID-19 committee meeting, Jan Atkinson and Bill Powell did a presentation and offered some potential scenarios for what transportation could look like. And there was some robust discussion about limiting transportation within zones and limiting transportation to magnet schools and that sort of thing. So I wanted to provide an overview of what our policies say about transportation, and then conclude by talking about what we might be asking next steps as we develop this plan. In order to understand kind of the why behind our board policies, I wanted to just pull out a few snippets from our state statutes that talk about the authority of local boards in regards to providing bus transportation for students. And so under North Carolina General Statutes 115C-239, it talks about the authority of each local board of education to acquire, own, lease, contract, and operate school buses for the transportation of pupils enrolled in the school system. And it talks about the State Board of Education coming up with some additional regulations for how that would take place. Each school board may operate buses to and from the schools within the local school administrative unit, and in such number and manner as the board shall determine from time to time is practical and appropriate for the safe, orderly, and efficient transportation of pupils to school. The statutes go on to say that although that's the overarching premise, ultimately the superintendent is delegated the authority to establish and implement the transportation plan for the local school administrative unit. And it goes on to say that some of those considerations are, again, the safety and efficiency of the operation of that transportation system. It also goes on to say that the superintendent may, from time to time, revise such transportation allocation and assignments of buses to schools, and may make additional assignments to schools, or may withdraw buses from schools as needed. And then ultimately, again, the superintendent has the authority to assign pupils and employees to school buses, as well as assign those buses to particular schools. And the assignments shall be made to provide for, again, the orderly, safe, and efficient transportation of students to schools, and to promote the orderly and efficient administration of the school and the health and safety and general welfare of all students that are being transported. And so I think it's important to emphasize that questions and concerns about safety and health and general well-being are already there. Those principles already exist within our statutes that establish how we implement the transportation system. So on the local level, we have several policies that address transportation. Some of them address when transportation will be provided, and some address when transportation will not be provided. And so in general, our policies provide that school bus transportation to and from school will exist in the following scenarios. For students that attend their residential school, students that attend a school within their attendance zone, magnet school students with a few exceptions that I'll talk about in a second, students that are assigned to alternative schools such as Main Street Academy, and students who have special needs that require transportation as a related service pursuant to the IDEA. Primary policy that governs school bus transportation is Policy 3541. And under this policy, it tracks the language and the principles of the statutes pretty well. It starts off by saying that the board directs the superintendent to operate a pupil transportation system in compliance with the law and, of course, with state board policies. This policy also establishes that transportation is provided for most, but not all students. And it says that parents are ultimately responsible for the supervision of students to and from the school bus or to bus stops. And I think that's incredibly important to emphasize that, especially when we start talking about the monitoring that might be necessary for students as they board the bus, and some of the conversations that we had last week about, well, you know, what if a student comes to the bus and there's no parent there and they don't meet the requirements to get on the bus. So I think it's important to emphasize that as well. And conversely, our policy also establishes the duties of parents or an older sibling, in some cases, to be present at the bus stop in the afternoons to pick up the child. And we have what we call our unescorted policy, which is, if students in pre-K for kindergarten or first grade do not have a parent or an older sibling to pick them up when they get off the bus in the afternoon, then that child is taken to the next high school, and there's a process for how that's handled. The policy also goes on to provide some general guidelines for the routing of buses as well as bus stops in general. So for example, the policy talks about how close the bus stop should be, or how close the bus should how close the bus stop should be from houses. It goes on to establish the kind of walk zone and the fact that, bus stops generally will not be established for students if they live within 1.5 miles of the school. Under statute, students that live 1.5 miles or more away from their school are entitled to transportation, but we actually have a policy that says if you live within that 1.5 miles for high school students, or within 0.5 mile for elementary and middle school students, you still may be provided transportation under certain circumstances. If it's an unsafe area, if it would require you to walk across multiple lanes of traffic, and so forth and so on. And then finally, our board policy establishes the right of parents to petition the board for a hearing to contest their bus stop if they are dissatisfied with that decision. So for those of you who've been on the board for a while, you probably remember some of those bus stop appeals that you've had to sit through, but ultimately that's a right that's established in law, and our policy outlines the procedures for how they can do that. Aside from our main school bus transportation policy, there are other policies that govern transportation in some way, and those are found primarily in our assignment of pupils policies. And so our student domicile policy talks about transportation being provided for homeless students under the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. That's an additional requirement to provide transportation. It also goes on to kind of plant the seed for students that live outside of their residential area or move from one domicile to another will not be provided transportation. In our assignment policies for elementary, middle, and high school students, those policies outline our choice process. And so the policies go on to establish that for students that make a choice outside of their residential zone, that they will not be provided transportation. Our magnet school policy establishes that for students who choose to attend and are accepted into magnet schools, they are provided transportation via our Magnet Express bus stop routes. There is a caveat to that, though, that according to our policy, if you are attending early or middle college, you're expected to provide your own transportation. It does say that there's limited Magna Express service available for early college, but that's on a limited basis. And then finally, our assignment of pupils policy regarding alternative schools and programs. And so if a student is assigned to an alternative program for a period of time, such as Main Street, for at least an academic quarter or longer, then they also are provided transportation as well, and that's countywide. While not explicitly in our policy, we do as a district transport students or provide transportation for students who want to leave their high school and attend classes at the Career Center as well. And so as we continue these conversations about transportation and what that might look like in the district, if we come back to school in the fall under reduced capacity and social distancing guidelines, there are some tough decisions that need to be made, but there will also need to be some consideration about our current policies. As we've discussed, there's an option that might include transportation to the residential school only, but not within the zone and not within magnet schools. That's an option. But there are other options that could be considered and ultimately will be part of the reopening plan. And so I just wanted to provide an overview of what our transportation policies are. And as a part of the reopening plan that will be presented to you at the end of this month, there will likely be a recommendation to suspend or temporarily waive some of these transportation policies in order to fully implement that plan for the safety, health, and well-being of our students. So that's a really brief overview of our policies. I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Any questions for Ms. Jenkins?
This is Board Member Jones. So at the end, so what I'm understanding is that there are certain things that the North Carolina, our general statutes give authority to our superintendent on behalf of the board. We give the superintendent, say, hey, make a transportation plan. But some of our local board policies set some of these other parameters out, right?
Yes.
And so I guess where I'm after is it seems as though in some conversation, I think with staff as they're planning and also with even answers back to parent emails that we are moving forward with saying already we're not going to provide in-zone transportation. Is that wholly in the authority of the superintendent, or is that one of those things that we'll have to vote on as a board?
Well, so I'm sorry, Dr. Harrison.
Let me jump in. That request was made, I think, by you last week, that if we were not going to provide transportation, if we thought we weren't, that we started communicating that early. That was based on your request. Yeah, based on your request, and so we started communicating now. We certainly can, it's easier to go back and say that based on, new plans, but we're pretty sure, even if you had millions of dollars to add to the budget to buy new buses, buses take 8 to 9 months to secure unless they're used buses somewhere. So if you get a new bus, you have to order by February to even get it by the time school starts because they're built to order. And of course, we've talked about that. So right now, what Deanna said, the final plan would need a final approval to waive these policies. But we have no problem just saying to everybody, we'll wait till June 30th, which is fine with us as well. But right now, the committee, based on the numbers that can fit on the bus, it's just hard. Now, I do think Daryl Walker's group is planning to bring something forward that says, here's how we could provide transportation in choice, like in the zones if kids have choice. But right now, we don't really have a plan for that or foresee a plan, but he's working hard on that.
Okay. Well, I think, I suggested if we're going to pull transportation, or that's going to be the model we're telling people, that we should let parents know that so they can sign up for the virtual academy or go to a different school or figure out what they want to do. I think the other piece to that is, I know it's complicated, but if there's any way that we could even, encourage and communicate that if you can provide transportation, to please provide it, so that it would open up slots for students whose parents or families just could not provide that. I just and also, if I could be clear on what does that mean for when we talk about magnets. I'm thinking of like Kennedy. Is Kennedy a magnet? I can't remember. Does Kennedy have a residential zone? I know Atkins does not. Will that change for just a year? Will it change? Are we thinking about using the Career Center? Will the Career Center be closed? I'm just trying to kind of get all that in my head. Maybe we're going to talk about that sooner than later, but I think those are things that parents really want to know.
Yeah, we are working on a plan for the mainstream student, and what we talked to the Career Center about was giving us an opportunity to figure out what the schedule will look like for a majority of students, and then coming back by exception. So recently, some conversation occurred with the large districts around using city transports. And our goal has been to reach out for those opportunities. Also, some transportation strategies were used on the No Child Left Behind, the old legislation. So we actually have a meeting Monday morning, and the goal is to bring you all a good plan within the next week. So that's more to come, to be honest. Transportation, regardless of where you are sitting, is a major issue. And it's only school districts. School districts do not, across the country, don't always provide transportation. But for those of us who do, it's very difficult. So what we'll do, we continue to challenge parents to say, with school choice and magnet, we want to give you early warning that this may not occur. But we might be able to pull a rabbit out of a hat and find the means, and that'll be a good news item when we come back for the final report. Ms. Bramer?
Yes, I've had a large number, and now that you've explained that we started communicating, and it is in these open meetings, it's about, changing the schools. They were extremely unhappy, and we would have a huge drop-off of people leaving the school system if they changed their schools. But so I was going to ask, is it possible that as we get closer, I know this is all such short notice, and everything is going to be winging it in like the last 3 weeks of July, where we try to make everything happen quickly. But we give them the option: can you provide your own transportation? You are listed as a bus driver, but do you have the option to provide it? If not, then we may have to go down this route. But if you have another alternative and you have to reach out to your support structure, then maybe they can keep their same school.
Absolutely, and that's something we've said to parents. We've made some shifts, and partially, part of meeting publicly, of course, people assume that what we talk about is going to be, the final plan. But these briefings are more or less to get feedback from you all, to let our public know what's going on, and they certainly do respond to emails, and we have to change our direction. And really, the final plan won't be in place until the 30th, when we bring it to you all for a vote. I think, Dion, when we went back and talked about the communication plan, we said, wait a minute, now there are some policies that you all need to be aware of that we may have to waive if this is the route we're going. So lots of dialogue, and we appreciate that. I agree. I think kids, with all that's going on, Ms. Bramer, if we can keep kids in a stable location, it will be very helpful.
And as I mentioned there, I've got on the sideline, so you're aware, Cooper is giving a current update right now, and it is on the increase of coronavirus in the state and how it is skyrocketing and not stagnant. Right, we've gotten that information too. I'm glad that he's sharing that with the public as well. He's doing it simultaneously right now. Okay.
Yeah, and I would say too, if we can get some firm numbers, and if there's any way that we could do the choices within the zone, it'd be really helpful, I think, and if we could nail down some numbers so that we are very specific and see whether that is an option, because obviously you're going to have a certain number of riders no matter where they're going to school. So if we can nail that, kind of try to go from there, that would be good. Do we have any other questions at this time?
This is
One more.
well, this is Board Member Kaplan. Just to say, completely agree with Andy. If we can get those parents, if they can offer the transportation and keep those children at the schools for their social and emotional well-being, I think that would be great.
I'm going to
We'll work on that too.
one quick, and I'm going to find quick. I know I got a lot of quick ones, but I'm kind of got a lot on my mind today about this. The elephant in the room that nobody also wants to discuss is the fact that our city is segregated, and pushing people back into the residential districts right after school is going to increase that segregation number more so than it already is.
We are concerned about that too, Ms. Bramer. We are, but what we'll do is, so Bill's plan was to bring you all the recommendation for residential only, plan for that, plan for residential plus in-zone choice. We know out-of-zone choice, they don't have transportation. And remember, we have to transport McKinney-Vento kids who are under that act. That's an additional transportation matter. And then also, we have students with IEPs who are in programs across county who have ridden other buses. We have to make sure those are two we're legally, we cannot waive. We cannot waive our kids under McKinney-Vento, and we cannot waive our children with IEPs. So those are our places we'll have to, we'll actually gladly work with those. And then we'll have residential, that's the third that's required by law. And then those mileage rates, and then the next tier will be with choice, and then the final will be with value. So you'll actually see a plan with the associated costs and capacity. So I don't want you to think we're just ruling it out. But you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is
And if you provide unicorns, that'd be nice too.
Ms. Bramer.
Can't provide unicorns. But if we could provide unicorns, that would be really helpful.
Okay, that sounds like a wonderful plan. So that's good. Elizabeth, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about that the more you mix up populations, the harder monitoring health is going to be. And I think we did have a discussion last week a bit about that, why. So for example, I work at UNCSA, and my understanding is students are going to really kind of have cohorts that they move through their lives with that are going to be quite different than what happened before. Mm-hmm. And yes, it's going to be limiting some options for students, but it's also going to make it much easier, as Dr. Hairston talked about previously. Do you need to close one or two schools versus the district as a whole? And we're not used to thinking in terms of population so much. Our society is very much the individual. But when you're talking about something like COVID, it really is a population issue. And I hope that we can keep that in mind moving forward, that what the district needs to do as a whole is going to be what's good for populations, and not necessarily what this parent wants for this child this year.
I agree, Elizabeth. I know track and trace is really, really critical.
Different. And it's so different from our kind of culture that we're living in right now. And yet it's a critically important issue if we're going to get through this together.
Because what a lot of people may not, when Bill is planning and when Daryl are planning, they're planning to keep cohorts from, and as we mentioned last week, mixing cohorts. So if a student rides a singular bus to a school and there's an infection, we can close that one school. If we have 5 students on a bus and they get to one school, but they ride to other schools because they're piggybacking to get to choice schools, and there's an affected child, that one child now has had contact with 5 other or 15 other children, and we have to now go figure out which schools they're at and close all of those schools. And so that is very much the conversation. So that's why we'll bring to you the different scenarios, because each time you transport student, for example, if you're in high school and you have every single high school sending a child, and one child sitting in one class with 20 other children who go back to other high schools, test positive, then those other high schools have to be contacted instead of the one. So anytime we increase choice and exposure, it is going to cause us to have to close more buildings more regularly. And so very good point, and was mentioned, we'll continue. But again, this is an opportunity for us to have discussion, make us go back and think about the plan so we can bring you a better plan as a board. So we are listening and taking notes and as we go through the process.
Sure, we just want to make sure we leave no stone unturned.
Yeah. Yes.
I agree.
Yes. Very much so. All right. Are we ready to move on to the next item?
We are.
On the agenda.
This is Sam. We're going to do a calendar update.
Okay.
Good afternoon, board members. I'm going to give you a brief overview of the calendar. But first, I'd be remiss not to point out the work of this group. This is a group of folks we've pulled, you can see, from central office, school-based leadership, teachers, multi-leveled. They probably spent at least half a dozen, if not more, meetings with me and the committee working through calendar options, as well as working on their own, kind of drafting different calendar options. And so a huge shout out and thank you to this group of individuals that have really supported this work. So before we get into the calendar rule, yes, ma'am.
And we're not seeing the page, I don't think. If you have you switched us, should we be seeing something? We're seeing your beautiful face instead of anything else. So,
I apologize.
Now we're seeing, but can you? Yeah, there you go. That looks great. Thank you.
Thanks, Marilyn. My apologies. So this is the calendar committee. As you can see, a diverse group from across schools and central office leadership. Before we get into the calendar rules, I just wanted to remind you all, kind of give you some back history. So you approved a 2020-21 calendar back last school year. The community gave stakeholder feedback, options were brought to you, you all voted and approved the calendar. Then the legislature, after COVID took place, kind of passed a widespread sweeping bill, which included changes to the calendar legislation, which required us to go back and take a look at a new calendar. So these are the general rules that we have to follow. This is from legislation and the most recent piece of legislation. So 185 instructional days or 1,025 instructional hours. We always go with the number of hours. The state requires 215 staff working days for teachers. That includes 11 holidays. The 12th holiday is the 4th of July for 12-month staff, and then 10 annual leave days. So this is like your spring break and the days at Christmas. The new legislation that was passed in May required a start date of August 17th. So that is a week earlier than what we had had previously. And the calendar legislation said we could end no later than June 11th, 2021. In addition, there was 5 remote instruction days required in every school's calendar. And I'll touch base on the remote instruction days a little bit more in a minute. So Winston-Salem Forsyth typically has had 14 reserve days for staff. Those are your come back to work, get your classrooms ready. These are your professional development days built in mid-year, days to work on report cards, and then kind of wrap up and clean up your classroom at the end of the year. So we typically have 14 of those days. And then we typically have 180 instructional days for students. This is comprised of 90 days semester 1 and 90 days semester 2. So if you see, our shortest instructional day in the district is 6.5 hours. 6.5 times 180 is we surpassed the instructional hour requirement by 150 hours by getting 1,170 hours. So that we are good there. Now, these 5 remote instruction days. So this is language pulled straight from the House bill. Deanne sent an email earlier today that the House bill looks like it cleared the first reading in the Senate without issue. But the remote instructional days are basically days that students will be home. There'll be instruction provided by the teacher, but they can also be used as teacher work days. So it gives some flexibility. There was 5 required in the original bill, but it looks like in the amendment, they will not cap the number of bills required. You just have to have 5 minimally. One of the things the calendar tried to give flexibility to do was to finish first semester exams prior to the winter holiday. You'll see in our calendars that it really is not possible given trying to have balanced semesters. But we'll kind of talk about that. So we have 2 calendar options I'm going to present to you. They are fairly similar, but there are some important distinctions that I'm pointing out here in the 2 calendars, or in these 2 columns. So first is that option 1 will have 5 reserve days for teachers to start the school year. This is important to note because we're going to be preparing, transitioning from remote learning to coming back to school. It might be on a little bit different schedule than what most people are used to. We'll have Canvas as our new LMS to get used to, as well as hopefully new instructional resources. But that means there's 1 reserve day at the end of the year for teachers. We have a remote learning week in February. That's the week of the 22nd. And that is sort of at the peak of flu season. When we talked about it, February always has the highest number of absences due to sickness. And with potential COVID relapse, we felt that a remote learning week, just a break from students where students and staff were coming into buildings, was important. And then spring break is, in option 1, aligns with Good Friday. Good Friday is April 3rd. The last student day is June 10th, and there's 5 total remote instruction days. Option 2, there are 4 reserve days to start the school year for teachers and 3 reserve days at the end of the year. So it gives the teachers a little bit more time to wrap up at the end. The week for remote learning is 1 week earlier in February. Spring break is actually 1 week later. So it starts Good Friday would kind of kick off the spring break for students. And then the last student day would be June 11th. And there are 8 total remote instruction days in option 2. I'm going to take this off my screen and pull out the calendars just to walk you through briefly. Now you could spend a lot of time studying these calendars, but I want to be able to share this with you and then talk about our next steps. On your screen, does it say option 1 at the top?
Yeah, yes, it does. Mm-hmm.
All right, so this is option 1. So, 1 minute. That one doesn't look right, I apologize. So as I pull this up, where we're headed with our next steps is that we are working on putting this on our website to survey staff and students. It is our hope that we will have this ready to go by the end of today, and so we'll have 1 week to 1 week to collect feedback and then bring you the final selection at the full board meeting at a potential special called meeting on June 30th. All right, I'm going to share this again with you all, but I found an error right away. We've kind of been going fast. All right, so this is option 1. For some reason, I think in our going back and forth and making some corrections, this should be a reserve day, August 10th. So that first week would be all reserve days for staff, holiday from Labor Day. Then we have a reserve day in September. This reserve day is to do unit planning, sort of to continue the learning for staff from what they got at the beginning of the year to kick off, and sort of do a check-in, support staff with what's going on remote instruction-wise, and continue the learning going. Then, so quarter 1 will end here in mid-October, an R day for staff to get report cards in, do some professional learning. Quarter 2 will start. This remote learning day is the date for election day. And so as you know, many of our sites are election sites, voting locations, and so we try to keep students and staff out of the buildings the best we can. So that is a day where students and staff will not be in the building. Veterans Day holiday. And then here you see that we will have some reserved for staff days, a break day in order to get a full week at Thanksgiving. One of the ideas is to kind of give a break for students and staff, get them out of the building, and then to, if needed, if it were time to go straight to remote learning, if we were seeing a second wave, we'd have time for staff to kind of prepare for that. And we would potentially be able to be out of the building if we needed to on these days, leading up to a long Christmas break. And you see, we come back in January and we have another week of B days and then a reserve for teacher days to kick off before they come back to finish up quarter 2. Again, this is in preparation for a potential prolonged break of remote learning, remote instruction for students. So we have a reserve day before the start of second semester in January. And then you'll see here we have another reserve day leading off the week of remote learning. So this would give staff time to prepare for the remote learning. One other feedback from the teacher staff is sort of that January to March stretch is really long and difficult for staff and students. And so a break, sort of a change of pace would be really good in the middle there. Early spring break, leading up to Good Friday. And then you can kind of see here's Memorial Day. And finally, we finish June 10th and one reserve day for staff on the 11th. And then, again, that would be the error. That R day should have been at the front of the calendar. So we'll correct that before we bring the presentation to the board. So that would be option 1. Any questions, or would you like just to see option 2? I mean, I know this is hard to not have time to chew on it and process.
Let's just go on to option 2, okay?
Let's roll with it.
Yep.
All right, so again, this calendar is quite similar. 4 reserve days to start the school year for staff, another unit planning, sort of continuation of PD for staff in September. The first quarter ends a little bit later with a reserve day for teachers at the end of the quarter to do their grades. Remote learning again for the election day. And then here, in order to have more days to count, we've got remote learning days for staff on these 2 days leading up to Thanksgiving. So instructional days for student and staff, but then to give a week out of the building at Thanksgiving. And again, if we needed to transition to a prolonged remote learning stretch, if there was a second wave, then we would be able to do that all the way through the start of January. So it would be about a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-week break. And this is kind of mirroring the university schedule that University of North Carolina is providing. So we're trying to stay fairly close to that. First semester would end mid-late January. reserve day for staff to get the grades done and prepare for semester 2. Here's that remote learning week in February. And then March is a long stretch before you have the week of spring break. So there'll be a reserve day at the end of quarter 3, holiday. And so it'd be a longer spring break stretch for students. And then it's a pretty straight shot all the way through the end of the year on June 11th with 3 reserve days for staff, the 14th through 15th, 14th, 15th, 16th.
And may I say, Sam, if you'll go back up to December in sharing, the reason for the, if you'll share that second one, we looked at the longer time, as we know that after the holidays, people probably will come together. So what we are looking at is proposing that Thanksgiving, 2 teacher remote learning days for preparation. In the event things worsen, we know that they could use those days to prepare for remote learning in December. And I'll ask Dion Jenkins to tell you a little bit about the legislation that we're tracking at this time about the use of e-learning. If you're prepared, Dion, I don't want to put you on the spot. And we felt that if children congregated over the winter break, then the additional days would give them enough time to become aware of any illnesses, including staff, become aware of illnesses before we have to reintroduce them to the learning environment on the 11th. That was the purpose for the extended December window of time, as we know people will gather, and that gathering, we wanted to give them enough time to come to some realization about their health. And right now, Dion, are you prepared to share that information?
Sure. You're talking about House Bill 1035?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening again, board members. Just to give you a little bit of a heads up, House Bill 1035 was introduced as a subcommittee substitute to the original calendar legislation. There was a bill that was introduced previously, but this one now is up for consideration. It's House Bill 1035. And under this bill, it would modify the calendar legislation that Dr. Mills provided an overview of at the beginning to allow for additional remote learning days. So originally we were limited to 5 remote instruction days throughout the year, but this one allows for the board of a public school unit to approve a plan that includes additional remote instruction days beyond those 5 days if it's needed to ensure the health and safety of students. So it does provide more leeway and relieves that limitation on those 5 days. And in doing so, the bill goes on to say that the public school unit must ensure that it's doing this in compliance with its remote learning plan that's due to the state in July, as well as all other COVID-19 guidance that's related to the operation of public schools that's issued by the State Board of Education, DPI, or the Department of Health and Human Services.
So we know that in February, we have 5 remote learning days proposed. February typically is a high flu season, and children will come to school ill, and this gives them a little break to recover from any type of illness. However, if we had to move to additional remote learning days, this legislation would enable me to come to you all and ask that those days be counted as instructional learning days. So thank you, Sam, for letting me jump in there.
No problem. Thank you. Board members, any questions? I know I went through those pretty fast, and I can tell you that it's an exercise. It's sort of like a brain puzzle to figure out the calendar to make it work. And so you really have to dig into it. So a quick presentation of it probably doesn't give you a lot of time to process.
Well, thanks for that. I think you certainly have allowed for a lot of flexibility in there, and I think that's what we're going to need. And I'm glad it'll be put out. My only question is, how are we going to? Is it through the website that we will advertise that we have the calendars up for review and for comments?
Yeah, so great question. The plan Brent and I have been working on is on our Reopening Schools landing page that Mary and Brent presented to you at the lead off of this meeting, that we would have the information there. It would be a simple survey question on that page along with the calendar rules. We sort of felt like that set the stage for why we're doing what we are doing. Certainly there's lots of different ways you can change the calendar, but it was important for us to kind of lay that information out for our public and staff to see. So hopefully it'll be a one-click, you like option 1 or option 2, and then we'll collect data there for a week. Brent will of course advertise it through our social media and through our calls. And then at the end of next week, we would close the survey, collect all the data, and be able to have a final option to be able to bring to you all on the 30th.
Any other questions for Sam or for Dion?
Thank you. It looks great.
All right.
Thank
Ms. Parker, I just wanted to say that to clarify that the revised bill 1035, House Bill 1035 did pass unanimously in the House, and it passed its first reading in the Senate. So it looks like it's, on its way, hopefully, to become law, but it does have some more consideration to undergo in Senate committees.
Okay, great. And when that does pass, as you are so good about doing, you will pass that along to us, so we will have that information.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you so much. Mr. Mills, are we ready for the next agenda item? I don't have, I'm sorry, no.
Yes, it's transportation update.
Okay.
With Lauren and Daryl.
Lauren and Daryl, okay, great. So Mr. Walker, Ms. Richards, are you guys?
Good afternoon. Can you guys see this presentation okay?
We can see that right now, so thank you.
Fabulous. So I'm going to kick it off talking about some of our facility preparedness efforts. Currently, our maintenance team is working on installing a plexiglass shield out in each of our schools. We are getting started by doing one shield at each school so that we can ensure equity across the district, as we have some unforeseen visitors within our locations that we have to receive. And we are also looking at some of our central office locations as well. Our facility specialists and administrators are working together to ensure that gets installed at the appropriate location. It's going to be more of a high traffic area as needed. And as we go through and do all those schools in the first round, we will come back through to assess if there is an additional location needed. We are looking into some mobile plexiglass shields, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about their use and functionality here in a minute. One of the other things that is currently underway is district signage and social distancing markers. We really want to make sure all of our schools have the resources that they need to post all of the necessary signage that is spoken about in the North Carolina DPI guidance that we have. And so Brent Campbell and his team, along with operations, is currently working on that. We will be getting those developed shortly so that we can put those in our print shop portal, and also put a packet together of some of that basic signage to send out to the schools. And then they'll have that printing portal where they can order additional signage, because we know that each of our buildings is slightly unique and will need some additional copies depending on their layout. Currently, we have a few other things that are under development. We are looking at classroom layout designs so that we can bring that back to you at a potential June 30th meeting. And so you can see what a classroom would look like with 15 or 18 students. We may also look at going out and doing some live setups so that we can maybe give you a digital tour through what that may actually look like in an actual classroom. We've tasked administrators presently with doing some of that in their own space, looking to see what that looks like with the varying furniture that we have out in the buildings. And there, in each of the schools, there may be encore classes that can be used to make additional classroom space as teachers move about the various rooms instead of the students moving about, and that will create some additional space. So they've been tasked with doing a few of those things. One thing that we may look to bring back to the board is possibly an administrative regulation request as far as furniture goes. We know, especially in our younger grades, that those rooms have a number of furniture items or specialty items. They may be soft touch surfaces, And the recommendation is that the more of those items we can remove, one, we have more space to provide social distancing between the desks, but we also have less surfaces that need to be disinfected each and every day. We are also looking at increasing our preventative maintenance plans for our HVAC and ERV units to ensure that they are properly functioning at all times to provide adequate airflow within each of our classrooms and other various spaces in the buildings. Some items that we are looking at as far as preventative, PPE, are a little bit more urgent than others. We know that hand sanitizer and dispensers are certainly a required item. We are currently planning on a minimum of 20 units per school, and depending on the specific square footage of the building, that may be adjusted. This is a large ticket item because we do need quite a few of them, and they are in very high demand. One of the benefits right now is we are seeing manufacturers kind of catching up to the demand in the marketplace, and so we're also seeing some of the price points drop over the last month, which is very promising. But these items that you see here today are items that we need to potentially order within the week in order to try and have them on hand for an August 17th return, preferably an August 10th return as our staff make their way back into the buildings to set up their rooms. These items here do have a very long lead time. Electrostatic sprayers is another item that we are looking to purchase to support our schools. We're looking at one per school, plus our central office locations. Those can be shared units, and then also some smaller, more portable units for our bus lots. These units actually are a backpack type unit, so that a custodial team member or another school member that's trained to use this equipment would be able to make their way through the school building either midday if students do go outside, or at the end of the day, and really be able to hit all of those high contact surfaces, desks, chairs, many different things, and do a nice lay down of the disinfectant to clean the buildings. On the bus lots, the backpack devices are not as mobile inside that small compact space, and so there's more of a handheld unit there that we're looking at that would be able to be used. We've done a demo with this equipment, and the great thing about these sprayers is you can do a full bus, getting seat backs, cushions, all those things in about 2 to 3 minutes. So it's even something that we can incorporate into a process in between runs so that we're really keeping that space clean. Again, that's another large ticket item. Does have a very long lead time, so they may come in stages, and we definitely want to be able to have enough on hand to support our schools. We are looking at purchasing masks for backup in schools. This is for disposable masks, recommending a supply for all schools to keep on hand about 150 of these at any one given time. So that as students come into the building, or even staff, or for some reason, again, an unavoidable visitor, we have a mask for those individuals so that they can still come to school, students can continue learning, teachers can get through their day. We do know that people forget things or lose things. Things always happen. And so again, this price point is definitely one that's dropping drastically as more and more of them are available. But the demand is still extremely high because it is becoming more and more of a requirement in different places of business. This leads me to the mobile plexiglass shields that I spoke about a moment ago. Michael Pesci with our social workers is the leader of the wellness committee, and he will be speaking, I think, next week in more depth about our screening procedures in schools. But these shields go along with that screening process in the morning. I believe the recommendation is 5 screening stations, and these mobile plexiglass shields will allow those individuals to not have as much of the personal PPE on daily, but be behind that plexiglass to do the screening. And then the great thing is that they're versatile, so we can move them throughout the day. They can be used in an isolation room if necessary. They can be used for one-on-one assessments in a school, maybe for an IEP meeting or other assessments, any kind of one-on-one meeting to help create a barrier, but still possibly allow a teacher to maybe remove a face mask behind the plexiglass shield if there is a child that really needs to have that interaction. It can also be an additional used in an office space if for some reason there was a high traffic area in the school. So we are excited about those, being able to move about the schools and support multiple needs. Again, that is a big ticket item, and we do need quite a few of those, 5 per school. And so we do need to get those ordered sooner rather than later in that timeline for next week. I'll move into information regarding child nutrition. We're focusing a lot on different wellness aspects, and nutrition is certainly one that we don't want to overlook. One of the topics here to consider is lunch service in the cafe versus delivery to the classroom. There's a lot of challenges that come with delivery to the classroom. The first and foremost that I want to mention here is the burden to teachers. And so when we deliver to classrooms, and the teachers become the individual that has to do a pre-ordering of what the students want for the day, because they are required to have selection and options for their menus. And then they also have to, once the meals arrive to the classroom, do a roster checkoff to verify that those meals were received by the students. It is time consuming, impedes the instructional day, and we know that teachers will already have their hands full with a number of other tasks, and we would like to not inundate them with yet another. Allowing the students to come to the cafe also gives them, like I said, the menu choices. We can have more offerings there to satisfy varying dietary needs, allergies, and it also helps reduce food waste with not having so many items going to the classroom, not being selected, and they have to be thrown away. It also allows the students some physical activity. At this time, we're anticipating, that students will stay in their classrooms in smaller groups or cohorts, and they may not have as much movement around the building. This would allow them, in an organized fashion, to get up, stretch their legs, make their way to the cafeteria, make their selections, and then make their way back to their classrooms, but get a little time out of the rooms for the day. Coming to the cafeteria also provides the opportunity for a la carte purchases, which includes bottled waters, some juices depending on the grade level that you're in, and then also snacks for the afternoon time for students to have. And I wanted to make a note here that the a la carte purchases for students accounts for about $2 million in revenue to offset reimbursements throughout the year. It helps support this program being self-sustaining and not relying on any local funds. Excuse me. Also, delivery to the classroom requires a significant investment in delivery equipment, and equipment that may not get used futuristically if for some reason we go back to cafeteria service. So there is a large investment there that can be avoided. We do have a number of schools that currently do breakfast in the classroom and do have some of this delivery equipment. So we're not saying that it is out of the question, but breakfast as an option, we do see that being something that is done away from the cafeteria, and we're recommending just inside the screening areas in various schools, because it is a way for us to provide that to the child just as they enter. They move on with their breakfast to their classrooms and can start their day, especially if there are any transportation concerns there as far as timing. We certainly do not want to impede instruction anymore than we have to. I want to talk about access to meals. We've talked a lot about A-week, B-week schedules, as well as A-day, B-day schedules. And so from a food aspect, when we think about the number of students in our community that are food insecure, I want you to keep in mind that our district is 59% of our students do qualify for free or reduced price meals. And we do have 39 schools in our district that are classified as CEP, meaning that all the students in those buildings do receive free meals daily. When we do an A-week, B-week, there is the potential for additional foot traffic in or around the school building, because we do need to continue to provide access to meals for those students that are on the B-week. And that could look something similar to that you see out in a number of restaurants where a meal is pre-ordered and then it is placed in a designated location, such as a bookshelf or a table, where families could come in and select the meals that they ordered and then take them outside the building, rather than having a drive-up unit outside, which was also an option, but will require significantly more labor. Also thinking about when the children go home for the entire week, it may be challenging for some of the younger children and their families to make their way back to the school to pick up those meals as families start to potentially go back to work. and receive income. And just making a note here that our daily revenue, looking at pickup meals versus take-home meals, would account for about a $94,000 a day loss with that A-week, B-week schedule. In looking at an A-day, B-day schedule, from a food aspect and supporting our students, this does allow us to package the breakfast and a lunch to send home with any child that requests it or needs it each day for the following day. And so it would definitely reduce our foot traffic back in or around our schools because no one would need to come back to the schools on those B days. I'm trying to get rid of, oh, there we go. I was trying to get rid of that a little bit earlier so you can see the screen. So I just wanted to share here with you just some of the numbers that we've captured since the initial closure. So you can see here on a standard school day, the number of breakfasts and the number of lunches that we typically serve. That lunch number does account for that 59% of our students that are on free and reduced meal benefits. In looking at the meals that we've served on a daily basis during the closure, including our mobile delivery sites, you see that we've done about 7,000 meals a day. Those numbers are equal there because every time we hand out a breakfast, we also hand out a lunch at those locations. And that is a significant difference there. And then if you look at the normal school year and you take away those mobile meal sites, because we're focusing on the school building sites, and we know that school buses will be used for transport during the day and will not be able to do meal delivery in between their AM and PM runs. When you pull those mobile meals away, this is the number you see here. And so you can see a significant decrease in the number of students that we would be serving potentially on those B days if they aren't able to take those meals home with them. I'm going to stop there for just a moment. Does any board members have any questions for me on that information before I turn it over to Daryl to talk to you about transportation?
This is Board Member Kaplan. So just real quick, the electrostatic sprayers, are those the hydrogen peroxide sprayers that I've been hearing about?
They are not. These sprayers, you can put any water-soluble disinfectant chemical in those sprayers. There have been some articles published recently about misuse of these sprayers. They do require specific training that we are currently working on developing and putting into a custodial manual, and then our facility managers will also be providing training to ensure that they are used properly.
Okay, thank you. And then also listening to your A day, B day, as far as the economics of it. So you are recommending the A, B day as opposed to 1 week on and 1 week off, as far as the economics go.
As far as from a food standpoint,
yes.
If you're looking at food insecurity, then the recommendation would be A day, B day.
Okay.
That is not an overall district recommendation.
Right. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from board members? That's very informative information and a lot for us to consider whenever looking at different options. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. All right, I'll pass it off to Daryl. Talk about transportation.
Mr. Walker?
Good afternoon. So as you've heard, this is kind of a heavy lift as we talked about transportation, and no matter what committee you really talk to around the state, whether it's a state committee, a PTAC committee, or even locally, obviously transportation has been a big concern for everybody in this process and how to make this work and support our children and our schools. I would be remiss if I didn't thank a few folks who've been working on this information and continue to work on this information. So what you'll see today is kind of preliminary information, but we will continue to work on it. But I want to thank Chris Cox, Ty Ash, Keith Shields, Ronaldo Branson, and Shelley Pritchett, who work in our transportation department, who've been working on this pretty steadily and continue to work on it. So don't let the numbers scare you a little bit, which you're about to see, but we'll continue to work and tweak these numbers to try to come up with a final plan. Screening has been a lot of discussion around that. You can see some of the concerns with screening at the bus stop and what that creates around long idle times impeding traffic, students exposed to traffic and weather and additional staff on the bus that may be needed. And obviously that reduces student ridership because anybody we put on the bus counts as to part of our capacity. The North Carolina toolkit states that there's an attestation form that must be collected on the bus upon boarding where parents have answered questions about student health. You see that as an option, the screening. So the child may get and still need to grant permission on the bus. We've had some discussions around school issuing pads for students for use versus for parents to fill out to hand in each day they get on the bus. There's some other options that we may look at exploring in this process of screening. Is there a way the parents can use Here Comes the Bus app for completion? So kind of already have that technology. A lot of them use already. Is there a way to kind of include that information in the bus app? And or maybe we request from the state for parents to sign an agreement form at the start of the school year, screening and temperature checks to be just completed at the school level versus at the bus stop. And then I think Deanna actually mentioned the unescorted policy that came up in her conversation, and I think we need to probably revisit. This may be a great time to revisit that as well. So just so you know what the protocol when a child does not have the attestation form, we've discussed maybe an isolation space on the bus, but that may not be able because we can't add plexiglass, and we've been requested to load from the rear to the front, so there's no way to truly isolate students. So you see, these are going to be real challenges as we continue to move forward, but you'll see more to come on that. Lauren, can you go to the next? Okay. So the next item was the bus cleaning protocols. So we've had a lot of discussion around how we're going to support down the road. It must be completely regular cleaning methods, high touch services between routes, a full clean on the AM and PM runs. We're now having cleaning procedures put in place in our buses. And we're developing those for midday and end of the day runs, as I mentioned. The electrostatic sprayers that Lauren mentioned will aid in the speed of completion of this process. And we've done a couple of different models around that. And I think Lauren mentioned, 2 to 3 minutes, we could sterilize those areas on our buses that need that. There is some conflicting guidance, believe it or not, that we need some clarity around. DHS, a required sanitizer on the bus. DPI and DOT do not recommend those products on the bus because they are flammable products. We've been working with our local fire marshal as well for the same challenges within the school building and how we will manage that, and they will support us in that. So we're working with the state trying to get some clarity around what rules and guidelines are we working within here in order to give good direction. Run on. This is kind of the what you've kind of been waiting to see. And again, I don't want this to scare you, but it's kind of preliminary numbers as we've looked at about 9 or 10 routes that just kind of collect some data around. I'll start and go back to the top though and assume the strictest social distancing guidelines are required. 72 passenger bus at 25% capacity is around 18 students. The 66 passenger bus at 25, you can see, is around 16 students that we're currently looking at for our current 50% capacity model. Using the current routes and servicing residential and choice zones only. Route time average increases 131%, and your mileage average increase is 70%. If you look at residential only for current assignments, then your route time increases 64%, and your mileage average increase you see is 25%. So it kind of leads you into that, even though it's still high percentage that the residential, and this would include residential EC, McKinney Vito, and then our students that we have to support that are in foster care as well. So we will see some significant increase in transportation time needed as we continue to move through this process. And, it may need that arrival and departure times in our windows may need to be modified. Bus pairings will need to be modified in order to provide the service. We've talked a little bit about that. So the additional, if magnet is suspended and choice is suspended, it obviously frees up some opportunities to reduce those residential percentages that you see in these preliminary studies. Next slide, Lauren. Just some driver considerations that you need to be aware of, and some of the concerns that we're looking at is that about 127 of our drivers are 65 years of age or older. So obviously they are in the compromised age group that's really concerning to us. DOT requirements reduce the PPE options for school bus drivers to wear en route. So for instance, they can wear masks and shield while kids are boarding the bus, but the minute that the bus takes off, they have to remove their PPE as required right now by DOT. So that impedes the driver if they're wearing masks and shields and other PPE. So real concerns and things we got to work around with the state on those as we continue to move down this path. And then obviously right now we're looking at there probably being some longer runs requiring more hours for drivers. So one of the things that we could look at if we're running residential, a lot of those smaller districts around us already use school-based qualified available to support their routes. So some of their classified employees also get their bus license and support residential in a lot of our smaller districts, mainly Davie, Surrey, Davidson, and Stokes around us. And you've heard a little bit about our partnerships. And I think Effie shared some information with her today for some contacts with WISTA as a potential opportunity to have some conversations with, as well as PARC. Is their model is a little bit like our magnet. You pick people up at a certain location, take them to work. Could be a similar model that we look at if we look at magnets down the road. So that's in a nutshell just a small snapshot of transportation and what we've modeled so far. Still got a lot more work to do to bring you a final plan, but just wanted to give you some highlights today.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Walker? All right. Well, I'm sure you guys will have a lot more for us later. And is there, Dr. Harrison, do you have anything more or anything that anything more to add to this?
I do not. We are still exploring. We had some good dialogue with principals today. They had some feedback on some different models for having students on campuses this fall that we are exploring and hopefully can share more next week. So we thank you again. If you all will continue to email and research these ideas and know that we are just being flexible and we want to bring you the best plan possible. We appreciate your time. 2 hours is a lot of time to take out of your schedule, and we do appreciate it. And I want to thank the staff. They worked really hard today to present. Brent, Sam, Dion, Daryl, and Lauren they worked very hard to bring a good presentation. So thank you so much.
They have. We've had a lot of information and a lot of good feedback and a lot of things to think about in the next little while. So there's there's no other comments, I will adjourn this meeting, but before we do that, Dr. Harrison, at one point we had talked about having Zoom meetings next week. Do we need to do that, or do we need to go to the time?
I think we'll be fine with having next week, the one meeting. We're back at, I think we're back at 2 o'clock next week.
Yes, ma'am.
I think we can, we'll bring a lot of information next week as well, but so I think we're good for next week at 2 o'clock at the same time.
Okay, then we will meet again next week at 2 o'clock, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank everybody, and thanks to the the one thing I do want to say is that remember that all this is still discussion and nothing has been voted on, and that won't happen until later in the month. So it's
Yes,
just
ma'am.
evolving. So as I think we've said 2 or 3 times today, nothing is written in stone yet. So
Yes, ma'am.
thank everybody very much for your time. And,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you for joining us on your school channel, Cable 2.